Let me tell you something about people who celebrate too early. They always leave evidence. My former mother-in-law, Sandra Harrington, is a meticulous woman. She keeps thank you notes in labeled folders by year. She has a color-coded calendar that runs 18 months out. She plans events the way military commanders plan operations. Guest lists, seating arrangements, talking points, contingencies. She planned the party to celebrate my divorce with the same precision she brought to everything else. She just forgot to check who owned the building. My name is Diane Mercer. I was married to the Harrington family's oldest son, Preston, for 11 years. And on a Saturday night in April of 2023, while 60 of Nashville's most carefully curated social connections sat in a private event space in the Gulch neighborhood drinking Sandra's champagne and watching a slideshow titled, "I Am Not Making This Up, Onward and Upward, the Harrington Family Moves Forward," I was 45 minutes away at my kitchen table, reading the building manager's confirmation email for the third time. The acquisition had closed 2 weeks earlier. I owned the building. And I had left very specific instructions about what to do if anyone tried to host a private event in my building without a signed contract and proof of insurance. Part 1. The Betrayal. I grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the daughter of a high school history teacher and a woman who ran a small alterations shop out of our garage. We were comfortable in the way that careful, hardworking people are comfortable. Not wealthy, not struggling, just steady. I went to Middle Tennessee State on a partial scholarship and a lot of student loans, got a business degree and started working in commercial real estate at 23. By 27 I was doing well. Not spectacularly, I wasn't wealthy, but I was building something real, developing expertise in property valuation and investment analysis, earning a reputation in Nashville's commercial real estate market as someone with a good eye and a serious work ethic. I met Preston Harrington at a charity gala in 2011. The kind of Nashville event where old money mingles with new money and real estate money mingles with music industry money and everyone is there to be seen by everyone else. Preston was 30, handsome, easy to be around and fundamentally decent in a way that I always believed and still believe. He was a civil attorney at his father's firm. He liked backpacking and bad movies and made very good biscuits on Sunday mornings. What Preston was not, and I say this without hostility because I think it's simply true, was a man who had been allowed to develop a fully independent identity from his family. The Harringtons of Nashville were old Tennessee money. A law firm that went back 3 generations, a name on a hospital wing, a social circle that's self-reinforced with the consistency of a closed ecosystem. Preston had grown up inside that world and, despite his genuine kindness, had inherited its fundamental assumption that the Harrington name and the Harrington standards and the Harrington way of doing things were the correct benchmarks against which everything else was measured. That included me. Sandra Harrington formed her opinion of me at our first meeting, a dinner at the family home in Belmead, and I think it was fully crystallized before the appetizers arrived. I was not from a family she recognized. I had not attended the right schools. I worked in commercial real estate, a respectable field she allowed but not a distinguished one. I was pretty enough and well-spoken enough, and she spent the next 11 years treating those qualities as a pleasant surprise rather than a baseline expectation. Frank Harrington, Preston's father, was less interested in me as a social project than Sandra was and more interested in me as a professional one. He was a senior partner at the family firm, a precise, intelligent man who asked good questions about my work and seemed genuinely curious about the commercial property market in a way Sandra was not. I thought for a while that Frank and I might develop a real professional respect. What I didn't understand until much later was that Frank's interest in my work was not warmth. It was assessment. He was determining, with the methodical precision of a litigator, whether I was useful to the family or merely tolerated by it. The determination I would eventually learn was merely tolerated. Preston's younger sister, Ashley, was the third dimension of the family dynamic. Ashley was 26 when I entered the picture, beautiful, socially adept, fiercely loyal to her mother, and possessed of a particular gift for saying cutting things in a tone that left you unable to clearly identify whether you'd been insulted. She hosted the family's narrative the way Sandra hosted its events, with flawless surface and deliberate intent underneath. The early years of the marriage were not bad. Preston and I built a life that was genuinely ours. A house in East Nashville, a circle of friends, the rhythms of 2 busy professionals making something work. I continued building my career in commercial property. Preston made partner at the firm. We talked about children and decided to wait, then waited longer, then stopped deciding actively and let time make the decision for us, which it eventually did. The Harringtons were a constant presence in ways that gradually became a persistent pressure. Sunday dinners that were less invitations than summons. Family vacations to their lake house in Hendersonville that Preston couldn't comfortably decline. Sandra's periodic commentary on our house, our social choices, our failure to yet produce Harrington grandchildren. I managed all of it. I was good at managing things. What I was less good at, and this is my honest accounting of my own failure in this marriage, was telling Preston clearly how much it was costing me. I managed instead of communicated. I kept the peace instead of drawing lines. And Preston, who was conflict avoidant in the specific way that beloved sons of domineering mothers sometimes are, read my management as contentment and didn't push for the harder conversation. By 2019, 8 years in, we were living parallel lives in the same house. Not hostile, never hostile, just separate. The marriage had slowly become a comfortable arrangement between two people who had forgotten to keep choosing each other. We started couples counseling in 2020. It helped briefly, then revealed the structural problem. Preston was not willing, at the level it would have actually mattered, to choose our marriage over his family's comfort. He couldn't tell his mother no. He couldn't set a boundary with Ashley. He couldn't prioritize what we needed in private over what the Harringtons needed in public. We separated in the fall of 2021 and filed for divorce in early 2022. The divorce itself was not acrimonious. Preston was fair, our attorneys were professional, and because we had no children and had kept our finances mostly separate, a fact that would become very significant, the legal process was clean. It finalized in April of 2023. On the night it finalized, I was at home alone, having a quiet glass of wine and watching a documentary about the Appalachian Trail that I'd been meaning to get to for months. I had no idea that night what was happening 45 minutes away in the Gulch. I found out 3 days later from a friend named Carla who moved in overlapping social circles with the Harringtons and had attended the event without fully understanding, until she was inside, what kind of event it actually was. "Diane," Carla said on the phone in the voice people use when they're about to say something they know is going to land hard, "I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it from me before you hear it somewhere else." He told me about the party. Sandra had rented a private event space in the Gulch, a neighborhood in Nashville that had developed into a high-end restaurant and entertainment district, for what the invitation had described as a Harrington family celebration. 60 guests, family, friends, social connections, members of the Belle Meade Country Club crowd, a few of Preston's colleagues from the firm. There had been champagne. There had been a catered dinner. There had been, at some point during the evening, a presentation. Carla described it as a slideshow, projected on the wall of the event space, that had ostensibly been framed as a tribute to the Harrington family's resilience, but had functionally been a curated collection of moments and narratives designed to underscore my inadequacy as Preston's wife. Carla was careful about details, but she conveyed the essential shape of it. My working-class background mentioned pointedly. My failure to advance socially in the ways Sandra had apparently hoped. A particular slide about the decision not to have children, framed in a way that placed the choice on me. A general tone sustained throughout, that the end of this marriage was an obstacle cleared, a weight lifted, a family restored. Onward and upward, the Harrington family moves forward. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after Carla finished. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And I was. That's the thing I want you to understand. I was not shattered by what she told me. I was not crying or furious or reaching for another glass of wine. I was something simpler and more clarifying than any of those things. I was paying attention. Because Carla mentioned in passing the name of the event space. 12 South Event Collective. In the Gulch. 3rd floor of the Meridian building on Demonbrun Street. I set down my wine glass. I knew that building. Part 2, the fall. I want to be clear about something before I go further because I think it matters for understanding what came next. The party hurt. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. There's a specific category of pain that comes from realizing the people who were supposed to be your family, who sat at your table and accepted your hosting and celebrated your holidays and called you their daughter-in-law for 11 years, spent the night your marriage legally ended making a slideshow about your failures. That pain is real and I sat with it. But I am also a woman who has spent 20 years in commercial real estate, And one of the fundamental disciplines of that work is the ability to look at a situation clearly, without the distortion of emotion, and identify what it actually contains. What the party contained when I looked at it clearly was an opportunity. Not immediately, I didn't know that immediately. The opportunity revealed itself gradually over the following weeks, as I processed what Carla had told me and began making a few quiet inquiries of my own. The first thing I learned was that the 12 South Event Collective had been Sandra's venue of choice for exactly the kind of high-visibility social event she prized. She had hosted 3 events there in the past 2 years. A charity luncheon, Ashley's engagement party, and now this. She had a relationship with the event coordinator. She had, in Sandra's own telling to her social circle, made the Meridian Building her Nashville venue. The second thing I learned, and this is where the story takes a turn that required me to sit down, was that the Meridian Building was for sale. I knew the building. I had known it for years, professionally. It was a mixed-use property. Retail and event space on the lower floors, office suites above, a rooftop bar that had been closed for 2 years pending renovation. It had been owned by a development group that was liquidating Nashville assets to consolidate elsewhere. I had looked at it twice professionally in the past 3 years and concluded both times that the price wasn't right for the risk profile. The market had shifted. The price had adjusted. A new listing had appeared 2 weeks after the party, at a number that, I ran the models, was now within range of a compelling acquisition. I called my business partner, a woman named Renee Okafor, the following morning. "I want to look at the Meridian Building again," I said. "You've looked at it twice," Renee said. "The price changed," I said. "How much?" I told her. There was a pause. "Send me the listing," she said. We spent 2 weeks doing what we always did: financial modeling, physical inspection, tenant analysis, market comparables, risk assessment. It was a good building. The event space on the 3rd floor was well built and well located, with an established client base and a coordinator who wanted to stay on under new ownership. The office suites were 80% occupied. The rooftop renovation, which had scared off previous buyers, was less complicated than it looked on paper. We made an offer. It was accepted. The acquisition closed on March 28, 2023, 2 weeks before the divorce finalized on April 11th. I owned the Meridian Building. And Sandra Harrington had a standing relationship with the event coordinator on the 3rd floor, a woman named Beth, who Sandra trusted completely and called by name. I told Beth exactly what I needed. Part 3, Discovery. What I'm about to describe is going to sound like something I planned from the beginning, and I want to be honest. It wasn't entirely. It evolved. When Renee and I acquired the Meridian Building, my intention was a sound real estate investment, full stop. The Harrington connection was not the primary reason I bought it. It was the reason I looked twice when I otherwise might not have, and I won't pretend otherwise, but the acquisition had to stand on its own financial logic, and it did. What I planned once I owned it was more deliberate. Beth, the event coordinator, had been managing the 3rd floor space for 4 years and was professionally loyal to whoever owned the building, not to any particular client. When I introduced myself as the new owner in the first week of April, we had a long conversation about the client base, the operational needs, the event calendar going forward. Sandra Harrington's name came up naturally, because Sandra was one of the most consistent clients. "She has a birthday dinner for Mr. Harrington scheduled for May," Beth said, checking her calendar. 40 guests. She comes in every year for that. It's a big event for her. I asked Beth a few professional questions about the event. Size, setup requirements, catering arrangements. Standard new owner due diligence, entirely legitimate. Then I asked one more question. "Beth, when Sandra booked the April event, the one the night of the 11th, did she file the standard event contract and proof of liability insurance?" Beth paused. She pulled up her files. "The April event," she said slowly. "That was a last-minute booking. Sandra called me directly and I held the date as a personal courtesy. She's a regular, I know her. We hadn't gotten to the formal paperwork yet. So there's no signed contract and no insurance certificate on file," I said. Beth looked up at me with an expression of dawning professional alarm. "Beth, no. I was going to circle back to it, but the event was short notice and—" "Beth," I said, "I'm not going to make this difficult for you. You didn't know there was a new owner. But going forward, every event needs a signed contract and proof of insurance in hand before setup begins. That's a hard policy. And for events that are currently in the system without that documentation, including the April 11th event, we need to either obtain the paperwork retroactively or address the liability gap. The April event already happened, Beth said carefully. I know, I said. Which means technically, a private event for 60 people was held in my building, under my property liability, without a contract or insurance on file. I paused. I'll need to send a formal notification to the event host about that gap. Standard procedure when we take over a property and discover uncovered liability. Beth stared at me for just a moment. You're the new owner, she said slowly, assembling something. Yes, I said. And the April 11th event, she said. The Harrington party. Yes, I said. A very long pause. Would you like me to draft the notification letter? Beth said carefully. Or would you like to handle that directly? I'll handle it, I said. I'll copy you for your records. I also did something else once I had full access to the building's event history. I reviewed every event Sandra had hosted in the past 2 years. The charity luncheon, Ashley's engagement party, and the April 11th party. All 3 had contracts on file, the first 2. The April 11th party, as Beth had confirmed, did not. But the contracts that existed for the first 2 events were interesting documents. They included, as all event contracts do, a description of the event purpose and setup requirements. The charity luncheon was described as a fundraiser for a local arts nonprofit. Ashley's engagement party was described as a private family celebration. I had those contracts on file. And I had Beth's recollection, professional, documented in our onboarding conversation, that the April 11th event had been described to her verbally as a private family celebration following a significant family transition. I also, through a contact I won't fully identify, obtained a copy of the evening's printed program. Yes, Sandra had printed programs because of course she had, which confirmed the event name, Onward and Upward, the Harrington Family Moves Forward, and which included, in small print at the bottom of the back page, the venue credit, 12 South Event Collective at the Meridian Building, Nashville. My building. My name was not on it. Sandra didn't know my name was on it. That was about to change. Part 4. Preparation. I want to describe my state of mind during this period because I think it's important. I was not angry in the explosive way. I was something colder and more precise than anger. The state I get into when a problem has a solution and I'm working toward it methodically, the same state I bring to a complex acquisition or a difficult negotiation. But underneath the precision there was something else. Something I've thought about a lot since. I was grieving still. Grieving the marriage, yes, but more specifically grieving the particular hope I'd carried for 11 years that I could earn my way into being seen by that family. That if I was good enough, capable enough, gracious enough in the face of their condescension, eventually Sandra would look at me and actually see a person rather than a deficit. The party was the final proof that it was never going to happen. Not because I hadn't been enough, but because the Harringtons had never been looking at me to begin with. They'd been looking at their own reflection and I was simply a surface they expected to mirror it back. Grief and precision can coexist. I've learned that. The notification letter I drafted was a single page, on Meridian Property Holdings letterhead, addressed to Sandra Harrington. It was written in the flat, careful language of property management correspondence. It informed Ms. Harrington that Meridian Property Holdings had recently acquired the building at the above address and was conducting a review of all events hosted in the facility during the transition period. It noted that the event hosted on April 11, 2023, had been found to lack a signed event contract and proof of liability insurance on file, in contravention of the facility's standard operating requirements. It requested that Ms. Harrington contact the building management office to address the outstanding documentation gap at her earliest convenience. It was signed, Diane Mercer, Managing Partner, Meridian Property Holdings. I had a building manager, a young man named Terrence, who handled day-to-day operations, hand-deliver it to the Harrington family home in Belmead on a Tuesday afternoon in late April, with instructions to deliver it directly to the resident and obtain a signature confirming receipt. Sandra signed for it herself. Terrence said she didn't look at it closely until she was closing the door. He said he was almost to his car when he heard, from inside the house, a sound he couldn't quite categorize. Part 5. Revenge. Sandra called Preston first. Then Frank. Then Ashley. Then on a Thursday morning at 9:47 she called me. I had been expecting the call. I answered on the second ring. Diane. Her voice was controlled in the way that very angry, very proud people control their voices when they want to deny you the satisfaction of seeing what's underneath. Sandra, I said. Good morning. I received a letter from something called Meridian Property Holdings. Yes, I said. I own the building. Silence. A very specific kind of silence. The kind that comes from someone who is rapidly recalculating a landscape they thought they understood. Since when? She said. The acquisition closed March 28th, I said. 2 weeks before the divorce finalized, actually. Another silence. I could hear her working through the timeline. Working through what it meant that I had owned the building during the event. Working through the fact that I had therefore known about the event, or had learned about it, and had said nothing. Had waited. Had sent a formal letter. What do you want, Diane? She said. I want to be precise about what happened next because it matters. I did not want to extort Sandra. I did not want to threaten her or publicly expose her or destroy her socially. The letter was not the setup for a blackmail. It was something much simpler. It was a mirror. I want the same thing I've always wanted from you, Sandra, I said. I want you to see me clearly. Excuse me. You threw a party the night my divorce finalized, I said. You made a slideshow. You invited 60 people and you called it Onward and Upward. I know what was in it. I know what you said about where I came from and my choices about children and what kind of wife I was. That was a private event. In my building, I said. Without a contract. Without insurance. On the night my marriage to your son legally ended. I paused. I'm not going to sue you over it, Sandra. I'm not going to call your friends or your club or your charity board. I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. Then what is this? An acknowledgement, I said. That's all. I'd like you to acknowledge to me directly that you know who I am and what I built. Not as Preston's wife. As myself. Because I think for 11 years you looked at me and saw a woman who wasn't good enough for your family's name, and what I need you to understand, what this letter is about at its core, is that you were conducting a party celebrating the end of my marriage in a building that I own. A long, sustained silence. You've done well, Sandra said finally. It was the most compressed, most reluctant thing she had ever said, and I recognized it for exactly what it was. The closest Sandra Harrington would ever come in her own language to the thing I was asking for. Thank you, I said. The contract gap, she said, shifting back to the practical in the way people do when emotion has been ventured as far as it's going to go. How do we address it? Retroactive liability waiver standard form, I said. Beth will send it over. It's routine. Fine, she said. And Sandra, I said before she could hang up, Frank's birthday dinner in May. It's on the calendar. I've asked Beth to make sure it's an exceptional evening. Silence. Why? She said. Because whatever happened between us, I said, Frank was always straight with me professionally. And because I own the building now and I intend to be a good landlord. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said in a voice that had lost most of its armor, Preston didn't know about the party. He was against it. I know, I said. He sent me a text the next day. He apologized. He's a good man, she said. He is, I said. He was just never quite his own. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Sandra Harrington, who had hosted 60 people in my building to celebrate the end of my marriage and had never once in 11 years looked at me without calculating what I was worth to her family's image, said something I had genuinely never expected. I'm sorry, she said. It was brief. It was uncomfortable. It sounded like something she'd never said before in that particular configuration of words. But it was real. I know, I said. Part 6. The final consequence. Frank's birthday dinner in May was, by all accounts, a beautiful event. 40 guests, excellent catering, the third-floor space lit the way Beth knew how to light it. Warm, flattering, the Nashville skyline visible through the tall windows. I was not there. I didn't need to be. The Meridian building has been one of the better investments of my career. The rooftop renovation completed in October of 2023, and the bar is now one of the more sought-after event spaces in the Gulch. Office occupancy is at 91%. Renee handles most of the day-to-day while I focus on the next acquisition. Preston and I have maintained a cordial, distant relationship. The kind that exists between two people who genuinely wish each other well without having anything further to build together. He remarried in early 2024, a woman named Grace who I understand is lovely and whose background Sandra apparently found more legible than mine. I hope it works. I mean that. Ashley reached out once unexpectedly about 8 months after the phone call with Sandra. She sent a short email asking if we could have coffee. I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. We met at a place in Germantown and she was, for possibly the first time in my experience of her, unperformative. She said she'd been thinking about the slideshow, she'd been involved in putting it together and she felt bad about it now looking back. I told myself it was just family stuff, she said. Closing a chapter. I don't think I let myself look at it clearly. You were protecting your family, I said. I understand that. I was protecting a story, she said. There's a difference. I thought that was probably the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard Ashley Harrington say. Carla, the friend who had told me about the party, came to the rooftop opening in October and stood at the railing looking out at the Nashville skyline with a glass of wine and said, "This is the most Diane thing I've ever seen. You found out your in-laws threw a party in your building and you didn't even tell them you owned it for 6 months." 5.5, I said. The restraint, she said, shaking her head. The sheer restraint. I thought about Sandra's voice on the phone. The 2 words that cost her something real to say. The 11 years of Sunday dinners and careful condescension and the assumption that where I came from told them everything they needed to know about where I was going. I thought about the slideshow in the building with my name on the deed. There's a thing I've come to believe about people who celebrate too early. They're not stupid usually. They're just convinced at a level so deep they can't examine it, that the story they're telling about someone else is true. That the narrative they've built is the actual landscape. They forget that landscapes change. They forget that buildings get sold. They forget that the woman they put in the slideshow might have been paying closer attention than they ever thought to pay to her. I poured another glass of wine and looked out at my city. This city I'd built a career in from a town 30 miles away, with a scholarship and a work ethic and the same stubbornness that had kept me at that table for 11 years. And I felt something that had been a long time coming. Not triumph. Something quieter than triumph. Something that felt like finally standing in a room of my own making.